At 2 a.m., sitting alone at the kitchen table, calculating a medication dosage by the light of the stove, the isolation becomes absolute. There is no shift change coming, and no safety net to catch you. This profound, bone-deep emotional overload persists regardless of rest, eventually dominating every waking hour of the caregiver's daily experience. People step into this role overnight, usually entirely without training. Inside, the mind attempts to process a dozen intense reactions simultaneously, and those feelings quickly pull tightly together into one indistinguishable, tangled mass. That resulting feeling of total paralysis represents a strict biological limit. The brain is simply trying to hold too much emotional voltage at the exact same time. To survive the daily grind, most caregivers rely on a raw instinct: suppression. When you have to manage feeding tubes or navigate insurance calls at 8 a.m., you swallow the panic, push the sadness aside, and force your way through the immediate task. This infographic illustrates the cost of that survival strategy. Every time an emotion is pushed down, it adds another tightly pulled thread. As highlighted below, suppressing those feelings makes the internal knot tighter, creating a feedback loop that renders the mind harder to navigate. Relying strictly on suppression traps a person in a permanent state of emotional chaos. The energy required to keep those feelings buried ultimately accelerates a direct path toward total burnout. Psychologists use a tool called affect labeling to break this specific cycle. It is the simple practice of putting a specific name to an isolated feeling. We can see this mechanic at work on the right side of the graphic. When you recognize an individual feeling, you pull a single thread away from the mass. This act of separation physically lowers the activity in the emotional centers of the brain, immediately lightening the cognitive load. Let's trace the first dominant thread. This red spool represents grief. Here, grief takes the form of active, ongoing mourning for the health or the former life of the person you love, even while they are sitting right in front of you. Below that is the yellow thread, fear. This is the constant state of hypervigilance. It is the anxiety of looking at an uncertain future, knowing there is a lack of external help coming to save you. Isolating these two massive emotions causes the caregiver's internal narrative to shift. The thought process moves away from self-blame, and a validated reality takes its place. I am grieving, and I am terrified. There are also sharper threads buried deep inside that knot. People rarely admit to the resentment of having their own life placed on hold, or the immediate guilt that follows the moment they feel that anger. Society expects caregivers to operate as endlessly patient martyrs, so those particular emotions carry intense shame. However, bringing these feelings into the light and stating them out loud strips away their paralyzing power. Looking at the bottom of the graphic, we find a different kind of thread. The teal spool is labeled peace. Even inside the chaos of caregiving, there are rare, vital moments of deep human connection that exist alongside the pain. Noticing and naming those specific peaceful moments is not a luxury. The brain requires those quiet victories to maintain the endurance needed for the long haul. When anger, grief, fear, and peace are smashed together, the body triggers a panic response. Pulled apart and given distinct labels, they reveal themselves as deeply understandable human reactions to an incredibly difficult situation. Organizing these threads does not rewrite reality. Naming your grief cannot cure a progressive disease, and identifying your fear does not fix a fundamentally broken family healthcare system. Emotional clarity instead provides a pocket of psychological space. When a crisis hits on a Tuesday afternoon, you can choose a deliberate response rather than reacting blindly from a place of suffocating panic. This requires a daily practice of spooling. As new crises generate fresh waves of frustration or sadness, you have to acknowledge and process them in real time to prevent a brand new knot from forming. This is the logic behind the quote at the bottom right. The more you feel your feelings, the easier it gets to understand them. Giving yourself permission to actually experience these individual emotions builds the capacity to carry them. Surviving the caregiver journey does not require perfect stoicism. It simply requires the willingness to look at the mess grab a single thread, and process the burden one emotion at a time.